Welcome back to our channel, where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales, and her royal family. Today we bring you some news. Breaking: Prince William leaves emergency meeting as King Charles's condition worsens. There was just the one essential meeting going on at Clarence House, and the sad look that Prince William has on his face tells a story that the palace has been trying its best to keep under wraps. The carefully constructed picture of a king fighting his illness is cracked, exposing a problem that has become increasingly visible and now threatens to hasten the fate of the British throne. What was said in that room in front of the heir to the kingdom that struck him so hard? From Clarence House. The silence is shattered. As he stepped out of the stone portico of Clarence House, the face of the Prince of Wales was a mask of grim determination. For those who have spent their lives watching the royal family, the language of expression is frequently more telling than any well-crafted communique, and this was one of those times. Some royal observers believed there was more than pain or anxiety in William's face. His was the face of a man who had been assigned a burden of great and perhaps immediate weight. This was the moment when the secret truth of King Charles's health battle met the public performance of royalty, and the story that had been so skillfully created and held together for months began to unravel before our eyes. The palace machine had been running with amazing efficiency for several months, and the Queen was not troubled by the situation. King Charles was depicted as a man who had managed to survive his punishment with the same uncompromising stubbornness that had distinguished his 7 decades as heir. Public appearances persisted, though carefully chosen. The statements were cautious, upbeat, and pointedly determined. The British monarchy, or the firm, as the multi-billion-dollar institution is informally called, carried on its entire global business with a deliberate and almost rebellious air of normality. That photo worked, a superb example of public relations. It stood for the institutional stability on which the whole legitimacy of the monarchy rests. It was designed to soothe an increasingly worried public. But already behind the scenes, a new reality began to take shape. A person familiar with the subject claimed the meeting at Clarence House had been called with a scary and unprecedented sense of urgency. The briefings here were not the usual kind, the argy-bargy over charitable patronages, the discussion of planned engagements. The guest list itself was telling that the situation was pretty bad. No social media managers, no press secretaries, none of that there. The most senior of the royal aides, it is said, were there. Sometimes referred to as the men in gray suits, they represent the institutional memory of the monarchy. They had with them members of the medical community, whose presence guaranteed that the topic under discussion was not politics, but the king's physical fitness to govern. And there in the middle was the man who would one day inherit it all, Prince William of Wales. The conference was held under conditions of total and absolute secrecy, and the opacity in the setting of the palace is not a show of power, but of crisis. The Royal Household Administration is a relatively intricate organization with a focus on structured communication and careful planning. Everyone in the house, whether master of the household or junior equerry, knows his position and the information he may see. The data is transmitted along pre-arranged routes. When that machine suddenly stops working, when experienced palace staff who have worked there for decades are met with unanswered questions and conversations that are abruptly cut off, it is a sign that the information being discussed is so sensitive and potentially volatile that the risk of a leak cannot be tolerated. This was not the normal protecting of a patient's privacy in medical affairs. The closing of a facility that was getting ready for the impact. That studied stillness had created a vacuum, and of all the institutions on earth, the palace best knew that a vacuum never long remains empty. It's loaded with a lot of stress, rumor, and suspicion. The king's counselors took a chance and decided to keep quiet, letting conjecture run riot, rather than make an early statement to tell the narrative. They concluded that the real nature of the problem was a more serious threat than any rumor the public or the press could make. Whatever was happening in that room was serious enough that the usual manner of doing things, the tried and true playbook for royal emergencies, no longer applied. This drew attention away from the king's predicament to the prince's reply. William has spent more than 4 decades perfecting a calm public face, a Windsor mask that reveals nothing. Queen Elizabeth II, his grandmother, taught him that the best defense a king can have is to be able to stay emotionally neutral. And so when those who have watched him most closely, who have tracked his every public move for decades, conclude that his style has altered significantly, it is the most important element of the entire story. He was no longer just the heir in waiting, but he looked like a guy ready to wear the throne. And all around the world this was witnessed. 100 years of full pressure. It's not just an emotional transformation for Prince William. It's also a tectonic shift in the operational reality of the British monarchy. He's definitely been ramping up his game and doing more public-facing jobs the previous several months. The first depiction was a son helping his father. Just a pretty standard, predictable movement. But now they are talking about something much deeper. This span of time is a formal acceleration of his transition to power, a process which is supposed to be measured in decades, not months. But now William is being asked to participate in discussions which for decades have been the exclusive domain of the sovereign and his most loyal, confidential advisors. This isn't about more charity balls or more ribbon cutting for the event. It's about really profound conversations about the institution's long-term destiny. And those conversations are strategic. The meetings used to be more general planning and longer in duration, but now necessitate his direct and speedy participation, the sources added. Decisions that had been distant worries for a future rule now demanded his urgent attention. The most striking sign that the period for succession is being re-evaluated at the top is the sudden change in pace. But to comprehend the impact of this change, a little knowledge of the usual cadence of a royal transfer is necessary. It is deliberately designed to be practically unnoticeable. For 70 years, the entire world watched Prince Charles walk slowly and definitely to the throne. He drew more patrons, increased his formal tasks, and extended his visibility. But the key constitutional power, including the last say on issues of state, weekly audiences with the Prime Minister and signing legislation, remained entirely with the Queen to the very last. This slowness is a feature, not a bug. It ensures not just continuation, it also precludes the formation of a competing court. It projects an aura of unbreakable stability. The whole procedure drags the school on, makes it seem endless. This is a totally contrary idea to what is happening today. The transition is sluggish, and planning has become a topic of significant concern. The chronology has been compacted to a duration that may be measured in months or years, in the span of a generation. This is more of an emergency field promotion in a battle rather than a well-planned corporate succession. That's a question no one in the palace wants to answer publicly. But the debate at Clarence House brought it out into the open. What happens when the slow march of history is suddenly kicked into high gear? We are in a de facto regency, an informal passing of strategic authority and power that does not have to be declared in the Constitution, constitutional scholars have said. The Regency Acts of 1937 and 1953 are directed specifically at this sort of situation, and they provide a statutory scheme for situations where a king is unable to make decisions for himself. But calling them in would be a huge move, an acknowledgement of crisis that the palace is attempting to avoid at all costs. They are trying to handle the handover themselves, with William taking the planning and strategic direction, and the king continuing to perform the ceremonial and constitutional obligations. It's a delicate and dangerous act to try to accomplish without a safety net. William no longer waits to be king someday in the future. Now he is forced to think and act as if he were a king. He is forced to make decisions that will define his own reign even before it has officially begun. All the while, he has to deal with the intense emotional pain his father is enduring due of his illness. This is no longer a theoretical process, but one that is being executed here and now and will have real-world repercussions for the future of the kingdom. Son, a lonely soul, a king's duty. Beyond the technicalities of the Constitution and the drafting of the strategic course of action, there is a very intimate human drama. Prince William is in a bind between two great conflicting duties: the duty of the frightened son and the duty of the successor to the kingdom. He is being made to choose between the two jobs. Every family's encounter with a catastrophic health crisis is personal and hard. William, meanwhile, is subjected to that close-up on the world stage where every gesture he makes is analyzed for the geopolitical value it has. The stability of the monarchy and the status of the United Kingdom are not in doubt. His passion for his country and his affection for his father do not always fit together cleanly and straightforwardly. William understands the seriousness of this event and is unwavering in his concentration on being there for his father, sources close to the family have said. As has been noted, every behind-the-scenes discussion is influenced by these two factors. He has to be there at the same moment as a son, offering comfort and support, while on the other hand sitting in a room with advisors preparing a future in which the same father would not be able to do his job. It's a psychological load that's virtually tough to bear, and it causes him to compartmentalize his emotions in a way that very few people ever have to. Let's not forget, William has been through this before. He could see the mental suffering and the enormous public pressure his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, was going through. He was thrown into the full, unforgiving glare of the world's media and had to deal with terrible loss at a very young age. He knows better than perhaps any other man living today what it is like to carry private sorrow while performing a public function. That awful thing made the guy he is now, and so fiercely protective of his own family, highly distrustful of the media, persistent in his efforts to shelter his children from the psychological damage that comes from living in the public eye. But now he's got a different problem. It was not a dreadful event that happened suddenly. It is that lengthy, stretched-out period of grinding uncertainty that slows a person down over time and makes them feel fatigued. One has to accept possibilities the heart would rather not accept than face. And he has to do this too, with cameras always on him, with specialists dissecting his attitude, and with the whole world wondering about his father's health and his own emotional state. The vast majority of people, when faced with a family health crisis, are able to work through feelings of fear, rage, or despair quietly, without the tale becoming a national one. William doesn't have that luxury, and he works very, very hard to win every single time he can keep his composure in public. Every public appearance is a show of steadiness, and that can be in utter opposition to the upheaval that is taking place under the surface. This calamity is putting to the test the numerous barriers he has spent his whole life erecting as he tries to find the balance between the vulnerability of a son and the steely resolve of a future king. The monarchy that refuses to yield. King Charles III, who had waited longer than any previous successor in the history of the British monarchy to ascend the throne for which he had trained all his life, is at the heart of this unfolding drama. And that was the end of decades of looking, of watching the world and the institution develop around him before he came to the throne and watched from the wings. All this assisted him to bring about his eventual triumph. What a bitter irony it would be to finally achieve that pinnacle, only to experience a big personal health setback along the way. What those who find their way into the palace agree on is this: the king is still fully committed to his duty. It is stated that he is refusing to let difficulties define his reign, moving ahead with the same daunting feeling of duty with which he has passed through all those years of waiting. This vow has been taken up by many of his supporters as a rallying cry. His many public appearances, his work on the distinctive red boxes of state papers, and his steady commitment are all particularly inspirational and admired by many. But that same dedication is now a cause of a quiet and rising unease among those responsible with defending both the king and the institution. Advisors are understood to be engaged in sensitive discussions about the possibility of adjusting some responsibilities